At my own retirement party, my daughter-in-law raised a toast. She handed me a champagne glass laced with poison. My dearest friend drank it instead and collapsed. I stayed calm, even smiled. Days later, detectives led her away in handcuffs while my son watched his world collapse. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The crystal glass slipped from Margaret Hayes's hand the moment her body struck the floor. My daughter-in-law's mother lay convulsing on the marble of my kitchen, foam collecting at the corners of her mouth. And all I could think, as I watched the life drain from her eyes, was that it wasn't supposed to be her. It was supposed to be me. The evening had begun in triumph. Laughter carried through every corner of the house, clinking glasses echoing against polished stone, warmth flooding my home as if celebration itself had taken physical form. I had just sold the company I built from the ground up after my husband's death. $23 million for a consulting empire no one believed I could create. At 70, I was finally closing that chapter, proud and free. Daniel, my only son, insisted on the party. "Mom, you deserve this," he'd said with that earnest expression he'd perfected since boyhood. His wife, Vanessa, volunteered to take charge of every detail. That alone should have warned me. The woman who once complained about emptying a dishwasher had transformed overnight into a picture-perfect hostess, arranging flowers, polishing glassware, commanding caterers with a smile. She moved through my house like Martha Stewart reborn, except I knew her devotion wasn't to me. Still, I allowed myself to be lulled. 30 guests filled the space, former colleagues, a handful of neighbors, a few family members. Music drifted softly, champagne flowed, and Vanessa fluttered about with compliments as sparkling as her diamond tennis bracelet. "Nothing is too good for you, Eleanor," she gushed, pressing manicured nails into my arm. But my years in business had sharpened instincts most people ignore. It was during a moment of small talk with an old partner that I noticed it. The quick flick of Vanessa's hand, the nervous glance over her shoulder. The small vial slipped from her purse. I watched her tilt the contents into a single flute of champagne. My champagne glass. The one with the tiny chip on the rim. The one I had used for years at every gathering. My blood froze, but I didn't flinch. You don't survive decades in a cutthroat world by making noise when silence serves you better. A snake always reveals itself when it believes it's cornered a mouse. So I kept smiling, nodding at nonsense about market trends, even as my daughter-in-law turned toward me, her face painted with counterfeit concern. "Eleanor, you look tired," she said sweetly, offering the glass. "Here, have some champagne. You've earned it." I accepted with steady hands, thanked her warmly, and bided my time. Minutes later, when Vanessa became absorbed in showing off her bracelet to the neighbors, I acted. Margaret stood nearby, absent-minded, empty-handed, looking for a drink. I set the glass on the table beside her purse and watched as she reached for it without hesitation. She sipped, smiled faintly, and complimented the unusual taste. My heart thudded like a war drum. The poison was already working its way through her veins. 5 minutes later, she crumpled. The room spun into chaos. Guests shrieked, someone dialed 911, and Vanessa dropped to her knees beside her mother, her cries sharp and practiced. Theatrical, nearly convincing. If you didn't know what true panic looked like, I did. Daniel pushed through the crowd, his face pale, eyes darting to Vanessa with a flicker of something more than worry. He demanded answers, but Vanessa clung to me instead, sobbing. She just collapsed. 1 minute she was fine. The next, I crouched beside Margaret, pressing a hand to her wrist. She was still breathing. Thank God. The paramedics arrived quickly, rushing her onto a stretcher. "Which hospital?" I asked firmly. "St. Mary's," the lead paramedic replied. "Are you family?" "Close friend," I said, glancing at Vanessa, who was too busy trembling to object. Daniel tried to stop me. "Mom, you don't need to come. We'll handle everything. You should stay here." How thoughtful. Keep the target at home, unguarded, while they scrambled to repair their failed plan. "Nonsense," I answered. "Margaret is practically family. I'm coming." At the hospital, I remained close enough to catch whispers between doctors and nurses. Acute poisoning, plant alkaloids, specific, deliberate. untraceable. Vanessa's heels clicked across the waiting room floor like a metronome, each step marking her panic. Daniel sat stiffly, his phone buzzing, ignored. "This is terrible," Vanessa repeated, voice pitched with false sorrow. "I don't understand how this could happen." I laid a hand on her shoulder, my own voice steady. "These things are mysterious, dear. I'm sure the doctors will figure it out." Then with a tilt of my head, I added, "It's fortunate she didn't drink much of that champagne. Just a few sips before she collapsed." Vanessa froze, color draining from her face. "Champagne, you think—" "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing," I interrupted with a dismissive wave, but my eyes locked on hers and I saw the tremor in her hand, the faint shiver of a guilty woman caught off guard. 3 hours later, a doctor announced Margaret was stable but sedated. Vanessa pressed for details, but the physician allowed no visitors. We left in silence, the weight between us thicker than the night air. As Daniel walked me to my car, he urged me once more. "Mom, maybe you should stay with us tonight. After what happened, I'd feel better if you weren't alone." How considerate, a safe haven in the very nest that had plotted my death. "That's sweet of you," I said, kissing his cheek. "But I'll be fine. I have that new security system, remember?" I slid into my car and glanced in the rearview mirror. Daniel and Vanessa huddled in an urgent whisper, their faces tight with frustration. At home, I poured myself a fresh glass of untouched champagne and sat in the quiet of my study. My mind whirred like it had in every negotiation I had ever fought and won. Someone had planned to kill me tonight. Someone I had once loved and trusted. And now I needed to decide what I was going to do about it. The sirens faded behind us as I followed the ambulance to St. Mary's. Streetlights streaked across my windshield, each one sharpening the truth I already knew. The poison wasn't an accident. Margaret Hayes had simply become collateral damage in a plan carefully tailored for me. Inside the hospital, the fluorescent lights were merciless, revealing every anxious crease on Vanessa's face. She paced the waiting room like a cat trapped in a cage, heels clicking against the linoleum in sharp rhythm. Daniel sat hunched over, his elbows on his knees, phone buzzing nonstop on the chair beside him. He picked it up, glanced at the screen, then set it down again with tight, jerky movements. Doctors rushed Margaret past us, monitors beeping, voices clipped and urgent. I pressed forward just enough to hear the words exchanged. Acute poisoning, cause unknown, plant alkaloids, not the careless mix-up Vanessa would later claim. Someone had done their research, chosen something rare and difficult to trace. Vanessa clutched her designer bag against her chest, her breath coming in ragged bursts. "This is terrible," she whispered again and again, her words collapsing under their own hollowness. I placed a hand on her shoulder, letting my touch linger with the weight of reassurance I didn't feel. "These things are mysterious, dear. Doctors will sort it out." Then, as if the thought had just occurred to me, I added softly, "Lucky she didn't drink more of that champagne. Only a few sips before she collapsed." Her body stiffened, as if I'd touched a live wire. For a split second, her eyes flashed with terror before she quickly masked it with another trembling smile. "Champagne, you think?" I cut her off gently, dismissively. "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing, just me searching for patterns where none exist." Daniel was watching me, though, watching us both, really. His gaze flicked between me and his wife with the intensity of a hawk circling prey. Hours dragged by before a doctor finally emerged. "She's stable," he announced, his voice professional, detached. "We'll keep her overnight for observation. The substance is moving out of her system, though the tests are inconclusive. It wasn't food poisoning." Vanessa sprang to her feet. Can I see her?" "Family only, and she's sedated. Best to wait until tomorrow." Her relief at being denied access was almost laughable. She nodded too quickly, her shoulders loosening as though a burden had been lifted. When we stepped outside, the night air was cool and heavy, wrapping around me like damp wool. Daniel walked me to my car. His hand brushed the door handle, lingering there as if he meant to keep me from leaving. "Mom," he said quietly, "maybe you should stay with us tonight. After what happened, I'd feel better if you weren't alone." The picture of concern. Protective son, worried about his mother. If I hadn't seen the truth with my own eyes, I might have believed him. But I had seen. I had watched Vanessa poison that glass, and I had seen Daniel's reaction when Margaret fell. "That's thoughtful, Daniel," I replied, my voice calm, practiced. "But I'll be fine. I have that new security system installed. Remember?" His jaw tightened. "Of course. Just call me if you need anything." I kissed his cheek and slid into the driver's seat. In the mirror, I watched as he and Vanessa leaned into each other, speaking in urgent whispers under the harsh hospital lights. Her face was tight with anger, his with desperation. Their shadows stretched long across the pavement, weaving together like conspirators in some secret pact. Back at my house, silence greeted me, a silence so thick it seemed to hum. I poured myself a glass of fresh champagne from an unopened bottle, this time certain it was safe, and carried it to my study. My mind burned with questions, but beneath the shock, beneath the betrayal, there was clarity. They had tried to kill me. Not with a gun, not with a knife, not in some rash moment of passion. No, this was deliberate, planned, calculated with patience and precision. They'd chosen poison, the coward's weapon, trusting it to slip into my body unseen, disguised as celebration. At 70, who would question it? A sudden collapse at my own retirement party would have been written off as heart trouble, maybe a stroke. The obituary would read like a tragedy softened by inevitability. But Margaret had drunk my death instead. The thought churned in my stomach as I set my glass aside and pulled out a yellow legal pad. I had spent 45 years surviving in business, and survival had never been about luck. It was about information, patterns, strategy. If Daniel and Vanessa thought age had dulled my instincts, they were about to learn otherwise. I began writing, every detail I remembered, every suspicious glance, every whispered conversation. Then I turned to finances. Their finances. Daniel's architectural firm had been drowning since the recession, and Vanessa's boutique jewelry business was more vanity than revenue. They lived too well, far too well for what they earned. The house in Westfield, the cars, the clothes, the vacations, all on borrowed time and borrowed money. I had helped, of course. A down payment here, tuition there. Nearly $200,000 in 5 years, money I told myself was for their happiness. But staring at the numbers on the page, I saw what I had refused to before. To them, it wasn't generosity. It was an advance. On my death. My phone rang just after dawn. Vanessa, her voice dripped concern. "Eleanor, I couldn't sleep. After what happened to Mom, I keep worrying. You didn't feel sick at all, did you?" How convenient, how very convenient. "No, dear, I feel perfectly fine." "Have you heard more about Margaret?" "The doctors think maybe she ate something that disagreed with her, or she took her vitamins on an empty stomach. Nothing serious." A blatant lie. Margaret Hayes organized her pills like a general marshaling troops. She didn't make careless mistakes. "That's a relief," I said softly. I was worried it might have been something from the party. That would be dreadful. "Oh no, definitely not," Vanessa rushed to assure me. "The doctors said it wasn't food poisoning at all." She was desperate to close doors before anyone opened them. Too desperate. After I hung up, I walked into the kitchen. The champagne bottle from the party still sat on the counter, 3/4 full. It looked so innocent there, sunlight catching on its golden label. I touched the glass neck with my fingertips and wondered what the contents would reveal in a laboratory. I didn't need proof to know the truth, but proof would be useful. Very useful. The game had begun, and I was no one's pawn. The cruelest betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from the ones who smile across your dinner table. The ones who say, "I love you," while plotting your erasure. That night, I realized blood ties can be as poisonous as any vial of oleander. If you want to hear how far greed can drive a family, stay with me until the end. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so more people can learn the cost of underestimating someone who refuses to be broken. At 5 in the morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a pot of coffee, a sharpened pencil, and a legal pad. The house was quiet, every shadow thick with unease, but my mind was razor sharp. I wrote down everything I knew about Daniel and Vanessa, every debt, every purchase, every careless detail they had let slip over the years. It wasn't pretty. Daniel's architectural firm had been limping since the recession, clients dwindling, projects delayed. Vanessa's so-called jewelry business was nothing more than a vanity project. Their financial records told a story of desperation. 2 cars not yet paid for, a mortgage 3 times higher than their means, credit cards stacked one atop another like a house of cards, ready to collapse. And then there was me, the mother, the benefactor, the easy solution to their problems. Over the past 5 years, I had given them nearly $200,000. Checks disguised as gifts, investments in their happiness, or tuition for Sophie's private school. Each time I convinced myself it was generosity. But staring at the numbers now, I saw it differently. To them, it was a down payment on my death. At 7:30, the phone rang. Vanessa's voice was syrupy, heavy with feigned concern. Eleanor, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept thinking about you. After what happened to Mom, I just worry something might be wrong with the food or drinks. You didn't feel sick, did you? I gripped the receiver, marveling at her audacity. She wanted confirmation that her poison had worked, that I had become her silent casualty overnight. Not at all, dear, I said smoothly. I feel perfectly fine. Have you heard anything new about Margaret? Yes, she answered quickly. The doctors think maybe she mixed her vitamins wrong. You know how she can be careless sometimes. A bald-faced lie. Margaret Hayes was meticulous, her pillbox organized with military precision, alarms set on her phone. She never missed, never confused, never careless. That's such a relief, I said, letting the calm smile carry through my words. I was worried it might have been something from the champagne. That would be terrible. Her voice tightened. Oh no, definitely not. The doctors were clear, not food poisoning. Just one of those things. She rushed to shut the door on any suspicion. Too quickly, too forcefully. And in her desperation, she gave herself away. By 9 o'clock, my doorbell rang. Daniel stood there with a box of pastries from my favorite bakery, looking every inch the concerned son. His brown eyes I once trusted more than anything, were now shadowed with guilt. Thought you might need some breakfast, he said gently, kissing my cheek. After everything that happened yesterday, I wasn't sure you'd eaten. I let him in, brewing fresh coffee while he arranged the pastries like a dutiful child. Watching him move through my kitchen stirred something deep in me. Memories of dandelions offered with grubby hands, drawings taped proudly to the refrigerator, the little boy who used to cling to my leg on the first day of school. When had that boy grown into a man who stood silently while his wife tried to murder me? How are you holding up, Mom? He asked. Oh, you know me, I answered lightly. Takes more than a little excitement to rattle me. He smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. That's what I was afraid of. A strange phrase. I sipped my coffee, letting silence draw him out. Mom, he began, picking at a Danish. Jessica and I have been talking about your situation. My situation? You're 70 now, alone in this big house. All that money from the sale. He gestured vaguely. It's a lot for one person to handle. And there it was, the setup, the soft approach before the strike. I appreciate your concern, I said, keeping my voice light, but I've been managing quite well so far. He leaned forward, intensity in his expression. Have you, though? Yesterday's accident with Margaret. What if it had been you? What if you'd collapsed and no one found you for hours? The gall of it nearly stole my breath. They were using their failed murder attempt as proof I shouldn't live alone. Daniel, I said evenly, Margaret collapsed in a room full of 30 witnesses. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Hardly a cautionary tale about solitude. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his teenage years whenever he prepared to ask for something I wouldn't like. Look, Jessica and I have been researching. There are communities for active seniors, safe places, medical staff on site. It's like a resort, really. The nursing home pitch. Sunset Manor, glossy website full of smiling elderly residents playing bridge under artificial light. A prison disguised as paradise. How thoughtful, I murmured. Did you have somewhere in mind? He pulled out his phone, showing me photos of golf courses and spas. It's close to us, Mom, 20 minutes. We could visit all the time. There's usually a waiting list, but if you pay the full entrance fee up front, you can move in quickly. $400,000, but that covers everything for life. $400,000, a neat dent in my liquid assets. The rest of my 23 million left vulnerable to the power of attorney they were surely planning. It sounds lovely, I said softly, forcing my voice to waver just slightly. But I'm happy here. This house, your father's memories live here. His tone sharpened. Dad's been gone 15 years. Don't you think it's time to start a new chapter? The gentle concern in his voice might have swayed me once. If I hadn't seen Vanessa pour poison into my champagne, I might have believed he was simply worried. But I knew better. I'll think about it, I said finally. His relief was almost pitiful. Of course, take your time. Maybe we could drive out next week, just to look around. Maybe. I rose and began clearing dishes, my mind already miles ahead. After he left, the silence returned, thick and accusing. They had waited until after I sold the company to make their move. Smart. If I'd died 6 months earlier, Daniel would have inherited without question. Now, with 23 million in cash, they needed a plan. A plan to prove me weak, incompetent, unsafe. A plan that would end with me tucked away in Sunset Manor, stripped of power, stripped of dignity, stripped of choice. But they had underestimated me. I didn't survive 45 years in business by letting sharks devour me, and my own family would be no exception. The morning after Daniel's visit, the house felt colder than usual, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the deceit from the night before. I moved through the rooms in silence, running my fingers over the furniture, the photographs, the artifacts of a life I had built with my late husband. Every corner held his presence. Every polished surface whispered of sacrifices made, battles won, years endured. And now my son wanted to sell it all off as if memories were clutter to be packed away. I wasn't naive. I knew the pitch for Sunset Manor hadn't been an act of concern. It was a calculated move, rehearsed and polished, designed to trap me inside walls of my own choosing, and all while putting my fortune neatly in Daniel and Vanessa's hands. By mid-morning, I called Richard Coleman, my attorney of 20 years. His calm, precise voice was the kind that carried weight in boardrooms and courtrooms alike. He had guided me through my husband's death, through the building of my company, through lawsuits and acquisitions. If anyone could shield me from the treachery of my own family, it was Richard. "Eleanor," he said warmly when I entered his office that afternoon. The space was as I remembered it, dark wood, shelves of leather-bound law books, the faint smell of expensive cologne lingering in the air. "Tell me everything." So I did, from the retirement party, to Margaret's collapse, to Daniel's carefully staged breakfast conversation about Sunset Manor. Richard listened without interruption, his pen scratching occasionally against his legal pad, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back, his sharp eyes narrowing. "You're certain about what you saw?" "As certain as I am that I'm sitting in this chair." He tapped the end of his pen against his lips. "The problem will be proof. Even if the champagne is tested and shows poison, Vanessa could claim it was meant for her mother, or that she was adding something harmless, an herbal supplement, a flavoring. Without direct evidence, intent will be difficult to prove." I leaned forward. "Then we need to prepare for the other angle. If they can't kill me outright, they'll try to take my freedom. They've already started with the retirement home suggestion. Next will be claims about my competence." Richard's gaze sharpened. "Exactly. If they can establish a pattern of declining judgment, they can petition for guardianship. Once they have control of your person, they have control of your assets. Sunset Manor would be the perfect staging ground for that narrative." The words chilled me more than the thought of poison. Being declared incompetent, stripped of autonomy, silenced while they siphoned away my life's work, that was a fate worse than death. "What do I need to do?" I asked. Richard slid open a drawer and withdrew a thick folder. "First, we document your competency. I'll arrange for an independent psychiatric evaluation. That record will protect you if they attempt to argue otherwise. Then we restructure your estate in a way that ties their hands." We spent the next 2 hours drafting protections, ironclad directives that specified exactly who could and could not make medical decisions on my behalf. Trusts that placed my fortune beyond their immediate reach. A will that cut Daniel's inheritance from everything to a modest trust that would provide just enough for him to live comfortably, but nowhere near enough to sustain the extravagant life he and Vanessa craved. And Vanessa, she would get nothing, not a penny. When Richard placed the draft documents in front of me, I signed each one with steady strokes. With every signature, I felt something lift from my chest. Power reclaimed, control reaffirmed. There's one more thing, Richard said as he gathered the papers. Personal safety. If they've tried once, they'll try again, likely in a subtler way. I'll connect you with a security company. Cameras, motion sensors, panic buttons. You'll be safer in your own home than in any so-called retirement resort. I drove back through the city at dusk, headlights casting fleeting shadows across the dashboard. For the first time in days, I felt steadied. The poison had shaken me, yes, but it had also clarified everything. This wasn't about paranoia. It was about survival. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car longer than necessary, watching the house I'd called home for 30 years. It no longer looked like a sanctuary. It looked like a fortress I needed to defend. The rose garden my husband had planted bloomed defiantly in the dark, the blossoms a reminder of life and resilience. Inside, the phone rang. Vanessa's voice floated through the receiver, sweet and false. "Eleanor, I wanted to let you know Mom's home from the hospital. She's resting, doesn't remember much from that night. The doctor said that's normal." How convenient. "I'm glad she's all right," I replied. "I'll visit her tomorrow." "Oh, she's not up for visitors yet. Maybe in a few days. I'll let you know." Of course. Keep me away from the victim until the poison has left her system completely, until memories blur and suspicions fade. After I hung up, I stood in the center of my quiet house, the ticking clock on the mantel echoing like a metronome. They thought they could push me into Sunset Manor, sign away my autonomy, siphon my fortune, and call it love. They thought age meant weakness, but they had forgotten who I was. I had built an empire from nothing. I had outwitted rivals twice as ruthless as Vanessa and Daniel. I had survived the death of my husband, the loneliness of widowhood, and the relentless grind of decades in business. I would survive this too. In fact, I intended to do far more than survive. The game they had started wasn't one I planned to lose. What would you do if the very people you loved most smiled at you while quietly plotting your disappearance? That's the cruelest kind of terror, the kind that wears a familiar face. If you want to hear how I turned their plan upside down, stay with me until the end. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this are warnings every family should hear. By dawn the next morning, my home became a construction site for protection. 3 technicians arrived in plain white vans, polite men who moved with efficiency, wiring my house with cameras, motion sensors, and panic buttons. To the neighbors, I explained it away as a precaution against package theft. In truth, I was preparing for war. By evening, the house was more secure than most jewelry stores. But the real armor arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, a thick envelope delivered by Richard Coleman's paralegal. Inside were my updated will, notarized trusts, and medical directives. I read every line slowly, savoring the way the words reshaped my future. Daniel's inheritance had shrunk from everything to a yearly allowance of $50,000. Enough for a comfortable life, but not enough to fund the Mercedes in his driveway or the endless shopping sprees Vanessa considered her birthright. The bulk of my estate would go to cancer research, a cause my late husband and I had supported for years. And Vanessa received nothing. I signed the documents with a steady hand. For the first time in days, I slept without fear. That peace didn't last. The doorbell rang the next afternoon, the sharp chimes slicing through the quiet. On my monitor, I saw Daniel and Vanessa standing on the porch. Both looked unusually grim, their bodies tense, their eyes flicking nervously toward the new camera mounted by the door. I opened it with a practiced smile. "Of course, come in." They settled uneasily in my living room. Vanessa perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands folded primly in her lap. Daniel's gaze roamed the room until it landed on the small black camera in the corner. "New security?" he asked, his voice carefully casual. "Package theft," I answered smoothly. "You can never be too careful." Vanessa cleared her throat. "Eleanor, we've been thinking about what happened at the party, about Mom's accident." "Yes?" I said, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. "It's just We feel terrible that it happened here, she continued, her voice trembling in a performance rehearsed in front of a mirror. If something we brought caused her to get sick, her words trailed off, and she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she produced too quickly. I watched, fascinated. The woman could have been on stage. I'm sure it wasn't anything you brought, I said gently. Daniel leaned forward, his face etched with solemnity. But what if it was? What if something in the food or the champagne was spoiled? Mom, I'd never forgive myself if you were put in danger. The script was obvious now. The careful repetition of concern, the feigned guilt, all funneling toward the same conclusion. The point is, Vanessa interjected, we think it might be safer if you stayed with us for a while, just until we're sure nothing like that happens again. Stayed with you? I asked softly, tilting my head. Yes, Daniel said quickly. Temporarily at least. You'd be safer with us. We'd feel better knowing you weren't alone. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Daniel looked earnest, maybe even convincing to an outsider. But I had known my son for 70 years. Beneath that concern was calculation. Vanessa, on the other hand, looked like a woman staring down the edge of foreclosure. Finally, I let my lips curve into a smile. That's very thoughtful of you, I said, but I'm perfectly safe here. Vanessa's voice sharpened. Are you, though? You're 70, Eleanor, living alone. What if you fall? What if you have a heart attack and no one finds you for days? I recognized the phrasing instantly. It was the same argument Daniel had made at breakfast. The same script, rehearsed and memorized, like salespeople trying to close a deal. You know, I said, leaning back in my chair, you're absolutely right. Anything could happen at my age. I paused, letting their anticipation build. That's exactly why I spent the day updating my will. The temperature in the room plummeted. Daniel's face drained of color. Vanessa's fingers twisted the tissue in her lap until it shredded. Your will? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. Yes, it's amazing how a brush with mortality makes you reevaluate priorities. I offered a pleasant smile, the same one I used when cornering adversaries in business negotiations. My old will was terribly outdated. It needed some adjustments. What kind of adjustments? Daniel's voice cracked despite his effort to keep it steady. Oh, just minor things, reflecting my current priorities. I held his gaze until he shifted uncomfortably. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. I could almost hear the gears grinding in their minds, calculating the damage, wondering what portion of their future I had just stripped away. Well, Vanessa said at last, her tone tight as piano wire, I'm sure whatever you decided was for the best. I think so too, dear, I said softly. They left soon after, their departure too quick, their smiles too brittle. I watched them from my security monitor as they sat in their car in the driveway. 10 minutes passed. Their lips moved rapidly, faces taut with panic. Finally, Vanessa pulled out her phone, gesturing angrily, while Daniel tried to take it from her. She shoved his hand away, her fury crackling even through the screen. When they finally drove off, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat back in my favorite chair. For the first time in days, I allowed myself a small laugh. Tomorrow would be phase 2. But tonight I savored the satisfaction of watching predators realize they had underestimated their prey. The morning sunlight fell across my study in long golden beams, but there was nothing warm about the day ahead. I'd already set my plan into motion. Linda Carter, a trusted contact from my business years, now ran a private investigations firm. If anyone could peel back the polished layers of Daniel and Vanessa's lives, it was her. Give me everything, I'd told her over the phone. Bank accounts, debts, hidden deals, don't hold back. Her hesitation had been brief. Eleanor, are you sure you want to see what I'll find? Family truths can cut deeper than any stranger's betrayal. I'm sure, I said, 48 hours. While Linda began her work, I prepared my own stage. I invited Daniel to lunch at our old favorite restaurant, a place heavy with memories. His graduation, his wedding rehearsal dinner, Sophie's first birthday. I wanted him off balance, surrounded by ghosts of the boy he used to be. He arrived fidgeting, eyes darting toward the door every time it opened, his phone lighting up on the table with texts he didn't answer. How are you feeling, Mom? He asked, voice strained. I've been thinking, I told him, stirring cream into my coffee with deliberate calm, about what you and Vanessa said, about my safety, about my future. Hope flashed in his eyes like lightning. And I think you're right. Maybe it's time for a change, time to make some adjustments. His posture shifted instantly, shoulders straight, breath caught in anticipation. He leaned forward, eager, hungry. What kind of adjustments? I called Sunset Manor this morning, I said, watching the shock ripple across his face. They do have an opening, but it requires payment quickly. By Friday. Relief and triumph tangled across his expression. That's wonderful, Mom. I think you'll really like it there. Yes, I said, smiling faintly, but it's a big step. I thought perhaps you and Vanessa could help with the paperwork. I wouldn't want to make any mistakes. His eagerness was palpable. Of course, we'd be happy to help. I memorized his expression at that moment. The boy I raised replaced entirely by a man blinded by greed. There was just one more detail to add. The facility requires a power of attorney on file, someone to make decisions if the resident becomes unable to. I was hoping you'd be willing to do that for me. Daniel's hands trembled as he reached across the table. Of course, Mom. Whatever you need. Perfect. 2 days later, Linda called. Her voice was crisp, professional, but I could hear the undercurrent of disgust. Eleanor, it's worse than you imagined. They've refinanced their house 3 times. 2 mortgages, plus a maxed out line of credit. Credit card debt north of $80,000. And Daniel's business? Running at a loss for 2 straight years. They're barely making minimum payments. I felt no surprise, only a grim confirmation of what I already knew. Anything else? Her pause chilled me. Vanessa took out a life insurance policy on you 6 months ago. $500,000. She listed herself as the beneficiary. The air left my lungs. How? She claimed insurable interest as your caregiver. The company probably assumed Daniel was the true beneficiary. There was more. There always is. Tell me all of it. Regular payments from Daniel to a Dr. Richard Steinberg, Linda continued. Geriatric psychiatrist. Reputation for competency evaluations in elderly cases. His reports tend to favor the family requesting them. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone. So that was their plan. Poison had been just one path. If it failed, they'd shepherd me into Sunset Manor, armed with a power of attorney. And if I resisted, Steinberg would declare me incompetent, a shadow of myself locked away while they drained my accounts. It was elegant in its way, cold, ruthless, almost admirable if it hadn't been aimed at me. That evening, Daniel and Vanessa arrived at my house with a briefcase full of papers. They spread them across the dining table with the solemn air of surgeons preparing for an operation. This is the admission contract, Vanessa explained, her voice tight but carefully controlled. This one covers financial disclosures, assets, accounts, income. They'll need everything. She glanced up at me, her eyes shining with false warmth. It's very thorough, but it's all for your protection. Daniel slid another document toward me. This is the power of attorney form. Pretty standard. Just gives me the ability to handle things from off you if you can't. I read it line by line, hiding my disdain. Standard, he called it. In truth, it was sprawling, granting immediate access to every account, every investment, every decision. With my signature, Daniel would own my life. This seems broad, I said, tapping the paper with a fingernail. Do I really need to give you so much authority? Mom, it's just precaution, Daniel said quickly. The facility requires it. And honestly, at your age, it's better to let someone younger handle complicated finances. At your age, the phrase landed like acid. What if I change my mind about moving in? I asked. Vanessa's smile was brittle. Technically, you could revoke it, but Sunset Manor has strict policies, evaluations, waiting periods, medical reviews. It's complicated. Of course it was. Once I signed, escape would be nearly impossible, especially with Steinberg waiting to declare me senile. I'll think about it overnight, I said, gathering the papers. This is a big decision. Daniel's face faltered. Mom, the opening could be gone if you wait. We need to submit everything by tomorrow. I understand, I said. You'll have my answer in the morning. After they left, I called Richard Coleman. His response was immediate, his voice clipped. Dr. Steinberg? He's notorious, never officially proven, but families use his evaluations to secure guardianship. He declares what they pay him to declare. The final piece of their puzzle clicked into place. Daniel and Vanessa thought they were closing the trap. What they didn't know was that I had already built a cage of my own, one that would close on them. The day you sign your life away doesn't always end with ink. Sometimes it ends with handcuffs. Stay with me, because this is where the game turns. And believe me, you won't want to miss what happens next. If this story chills you, hit like, share it, and subscribe so more people know how dangerous it can be to underestimate the wrong person. Friday arrived gray and damp, the sky sagging under heavy clouds as if the world itself sensed what was about to unfold. I dressed with deliberate care. Navy suit, pearl earrings, lipstick the color of old wine. If they wanted to picture me as frail and fading, they would be disappointed. I looked like what I was, a woman in command. At 9 sharp, Daniel and Vanessa arrived, both dressed as though they were attending a board meeting. Daniel's smile was thin, his eyes restless. Vanessa carried a leather portfolio, her movements sharp with anticipation. "Have you decided, Mom?" Daniel asked, his voice taut with eagerness. "I have," I said smoothly. "I think you're right. It's time for me to start this new chapter." Relief flickered across his face. Vanessa's lips curved into a too bright smile. "Oh, Eleanor, I'm so glad. You're going to love it there." I slid the signed Sunset Manor paperwork across the table. "All done, notarized and everything." Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he picked it up. "This is the right decision, Mom. You won't regret it." I smiled at him with a warmth that wasn't real. "I'm sure I won't." For the next hour, we worked through forms. Vanessa opened her laptop, tapping furiously as I provided account numbers, access codes, balances. She and Daniel exchanged glances that might have looked like excitement to anyone else. But to me, they were vultures circling. "There's just one more thing, Betty," I said lightly when the last page had been reviewed. "I need to sign some additional paperwork with my attorney before the transfer is official. Tax implications, you understand." Daniel nodded quickly. "Of course. Do you want us to drive you to his office?" "No need. He's coming here." As if summoned, the doorbell rang. But when I opened it, it wasn't Richard Coleman. It was Detective Karen Mitchell, flanked by another officer. Her badge gleamed, her expression professional but cold. "Mrs. Brooks, we need to speak with you about an incident at your home earlier this week." Daniel shot to his feet. "What kind of incident?" "Suspected poisoning," Detective Mitchell said, her eyes sliding from him to Vanessa. "We understand there was a medical emergency during your party." Vanessa went pale, clutching the edge of the table. "That was my mother. She had a reaction to her medication. The doctor said it wasn't serious." And the detective flipped open a notebook. "Actually, that's not what the toxicology report shows. Your mother ingested a concentrated amount of oleander extract. It's not a medication. It's a deadly poison." Silence collapsed over the room, thick as concrete. "We also had the champagne from that evening tested," Detective Mitchell continued. "The bottle contained the same extract. Someone deliberately poisoned it." Daniel's eyes snapped to his wife, horror dawning across his features. "Vanessa, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything," she cried, her voice climbing into panic. "This is insane. Why would I poison my own mother?" "That's what we'd like to know," the detective said evenly, "especially since the champagne glass with the highest concentration was marked by a chip on the rim as belonging to Mrs. Brooks." Vanessa swayed, her face draining of color. "There's something else," I said quietly. "Detective, show them the policy." Mitchell pulled out another document and laid it on the table. "6 months ago, Mrs. Brooks, you took out a $500,000 life insurance policy on your mother-in-law, naming yourself as beneficiary." Daniel staggered back, his face ashen. Vanessa's voice cracked. "This is insane. Eleanor, tell them this is insane." I looked at her, my voice steady as steel. "I saw you pour the poison into my glass, Vanessa. I switched it with your mother's. She almost died because of you." Daniel's head jerked up. "You knew? You knew she was trying to—" "I've known for days," I said. "I also know about the psychiatrist. about the power of attorney, about your plan to have me declared incompetent. Every piece of it. The papers Daniel had been clutching slipped from his hands and scattered across the floor. I didn't know about the poison, he whispered, shaking his head. I swear to God, Mom, I didn't know she would do that. But you knew the rest, I said softly. Didn't you? His silence was the only answer I needed. Detective Mitchell stepped forward. Vanessa Brooks, you are under arrest for attempted murder. As the cuffs closed around her wrists, Vanessa twisted her head toward me, eyes blazing with venom. You think you're clever? You have no idea what you've done. Oh, I know exactly what I've done, I said, my voice calm as the click of metal echoed through my living room. Daniel sank back into his chair, his face hollow, his world collapsing in on itself. My son, the boy I once carried on my hip, the man I once trusted above all others, sat broken before me, undone by his own hunger. The trap had sprung, and for the first time in days, I felt the faintest taste of justice. The silence after Vanessa's arrest lingered like smoke. Even after the squad car pulled away, red and blue lights fading into the gray afternoon, the house still hummed with the echo of her venom. I stood by the window, my reflection faint against the glass, and watched Daniel sit slumped at the dining table. The forms he had once guarded so eagerly were scattered at his feet like ashes after a fire. He didn't look up when I returned to the room. His hands were clasped, knuckles white, his breathing uneven. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the child who once clung to my leg in fear of thunderstorms. But the man before me was not that boy. He was a stranger, hollowed by greed and undone by the collapse of his schemes. Daniel, I said quietly. He lifted his head. His eyes were bloodshot, his face drained of color. I didn't know about the poison, Mom. You have to believe me. The plea in his voice was raw, but it rang empty. But you knew about everything else, I answered. The psychiatrist, the power of attorney, the retirement home. You were willing to lock me away to save yourself from drowning. He pressed his palms over his face. I didn't think it would come to this. I thought it was just paperwork, a way to protect the family, to manage things better. Vanessa, she pushed. She always pushed. That's not an excuse, I said sharply. My words cut through the still air, cold and exact. You let her shape your greed into action. You let her turn you against your own mother. He flinched as though struck. For a long moment, he said nothing, only stared at the floor where the scattered papers lay. Finally, his voice broke. Do you know what it's like, Mom? To watch you succeed at everything while I fail at everything I touch? I couldn't keep my firm afloat. Vanessa laughed at me behind closed doors. Every time you bailed us out, it was like another reminder that I wasn't enough. I just wanted to prove myself, to have something of my own. But I was drowning, and she knew it. She made me believe this was the only way out. The confession fell heavy between us. You wanted my money more than you wanted my love, I said. No, he whispered fiercely. I wanted both. I wanted your respect. His eyes shone with tears, desperate, searching. Do you really think I'd ever wish you dead? I didn't answer, because in truth I didn't know anymore. The hours stretched into evening. Neither of us moved much. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat across from him, watching the weight of his choices drag him deeper into despair. Near midnight, he finally rose. I'll leave, he murmured. You don't want me here. You're right, I said. I don't. His shoulders sagged. He picked up his coat, hesitated by the door, then turned back. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know I didn't put the poison in that glass. Whatever else I didn't do that. I held his gaze until he looked away. Then he left, the door closing softly behind him. Alone again, I sat in the silence, the house vast around me. Memories crowded in. Birthday parties, school projects, quiet evenings when Daniel's laughter filled these rooms. I had loved him more fiercely than anything, given him everything, and still it had not been enough. The betrayal cut deeper than Vanessa's cruelty. She was an outsider, a parasite. But Daniel, he was my blood. And blood betrayal is the cruelest wound of all. In the days that followed, word spread quickly. Neighbors whispered, colleagues called with stunned voices. The newspaper ran the story on the front page. Wealthy heir's wife arrested for attempted murder. Photographs of Vanessa in handcuffs glared from the headlines, her eyes wild, her hair disheveled. Daniel's name was mentioned, though carefully. No charges at this time, the article read, but suspicion clung to him like a shadow. Clients fled his firm, colleagues stopped returning calls. Even Sophie was pulled from her private school, the shame too sharp for her parents to bear. And still, he did not call me. Instead, one morning I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address, just my name scrawled in his familiar handwriting. Inside was a single letter, the words uneven, hurried. Mom, I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this. Vanessa's gone. The business is gone. Everything I built is gone. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I loved you once, and maybe I still do. But I can't face you. Not now. No signature. Just a trembling line where his name should have been. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, though I wasn't sure why. Perhaps as evidence. Perhaps as memory. Perhaps because, even after everything, some part of me still wanted to believe my son loved me. But love without loyalty is just another word for pain. The fortress of my home now felt colder, emptier, the silence thicker than before. I had survived their trap, survived the poison, survived the plot to strip me of my life. But what lingered was worse than fear. It was grief, not for the daughter-in-law who tried to kill me, but for the son who let her. A blur of reporters' questions, legal consultations, and silence that pressed like a stone against my chest. The newspapers carried her photo, hands cuffed, jaw tight, eyes still burning with defiance. Wealthy heir's wife charged with attempted murder, the headline screamed. My name filled every article, though I had asked for none of the attention. Daniel disappeared from the public eye. His firm dissolved quietly, clients vanishing overnight. Word spread that creditors were circling, lawsuits gathering. I heard whispers that he was drinking too much, that he spent his nights pacing the empty house while Sophie cried in her room. The collapse of his life was slow and merciless, a mirror of the collapse he had once wished for me. I did not visit him. I did not call. My love for my son had been forged over decades of sacrifice, but even love has limits. He had stood by while his wife poisoned me. He had prepared to sign me away into silence and shadows. There are wounds too deep for even a mother's love to stitch closed. Richard Coleman came often during those weeks, his presence steady, his advice precise. Vanessa's trial will take months, he said. But with the evidence we've gathered, her fingerprints on the glass, the toxicology reports, the insurance policy, there's little chance she'll escape conviction. And Daniel? I asked. Richard's mouth pressed into a thin line. Legally, there's no proof he conspired, but the court of public opinion has already condemned him. He'll never recover his reputation. I nodded, though my heart felt like lead. To lose a son to greed is a kind of death no courtroom can avenge. At night, I walked the halls of my house, the security cameras glowing faintly in corners, the locks clicking into place behind me. This home, once a sanctuary of laughter and love, had become a fortress. I was safe, yes, but safety had never felt so lonely. One evening, as the autumn wind rattled the windows, I found myself in the study staring at the family photographs on the mantel. Daniel as a boy, his grin wide, his arms thrown around me in joy. The three of us, me, him, his father, on the front steps of this very house, long before Vanessa entered our lives. I traced the frame with my fingertips, grief swelling sharp as glass. Somewhere along the line, the boy I loved had vanished, replaced by a man I no longer recognized. Perhaps it was weakness, perhaps it was hunger, perhaps it was her influence, or perhaps it had always been there, buried beneath the surface, waiting for its moment to rise. The phone rang, a number I didn't know. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mom, Daniel's voice whispered, ragged, broken. I said nothing. I just wanted to hear your voice, he continued. I know I can't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know I loved you. I still love you. I'm sorry. I closed my eyes, listening to the sob that followed, raw and unguarded. And then I hung up, because love without loyalty is nothing. The following week, I walked into Richard's office and signed the final documents. My fortune was bound by trust to charities that would endure long after I was gone. My home was secured in a foundation that would preserve it exactly as it was. Not a single dollar, not a single brick, not a single memory would fall into Daniel or Vanessa's hands. When I returned home that night, I poured a glass of wine and sat in the quiet of my study. Outside, the wind howled, shaking the trees, rattling the shutters. But inside, I was calm. I had faced betrayal, stared into the eyes of death, and lived to reclaim my power. Daniel and Vanessa had underestimated me. They had seen only my age, my solitude, my softened edges. They had forgotten who I was, the woman who had built an empire, who had outlasted rivals, who had survived grief and loss and loneliness. I was not their victim. I was their reckoning. And though the world outside would never fully understand, I knew one truth beyond all others. I had saved myself. If you've stayed with me through this story, remember this. Betrayal rarely comes from strangers. It comes from those who share your table, your blood, your name. But strength too lives within us. Quiet, patient, waiting to rise when we need it most. Never let anyone strip you of your voice, your freedom, or your dignity. If my story moved you, share it, like it, and subscribe so others may find the courage to guard their lives with the same fire.